I think we can use this as a fundamental pivot towards a low carbon, clean energy economy. We already see in the U.S. now that wind is electricity from wind is outpacing coal and other forms of energy on a daily basis with increasing rapidity.
Is that in terms of like price point, or is that in terms of energy generation?
Both. Both. And so wind and solar and the transition to electric vehicles and to more resilient grids that can accommodate new forms of energy, such as wind and solar and new batteries. This is all happening real time. And we need to use this opportunity to make our communities more resilient and also to create the jobs that we need to reset our economy. The new jobs are not in coal. The new jobs are in wind and solar and batteries and distributed grids. And there are a lot. We're going to need to put people back to work. We should use this opportunity. And I co-wrote a piece that ran in The Hill, a publication, The Hill, a few days ago, calling for creation of a Citizens Energy and Environmental Corps, modeled after the New Deal Civilian Conservation Corps, which put vast number of Americans back to work with public support during the Depression as a way to help rebuild our country. And now we still have the benefits of that. I cross every summer. I drive from Washington, D.C., where I live, to Cape Cod, where my mother lives. And when I cross that bridge to get onto Cape Cod, and I'm so happy I'm finally on Cape Cod, that bridge was built by the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 1930s. And that put Americans back to work doing constructive infrastructure. So we need to do this. We have the opportunity to do the same to rebuild our natural and built infrastructure in more resilient ways for the clean energy economy.
So I guess my concern there, or my, playing devil's advocate, I think after all this, maybe do you think people might be a little bit reticent or afraid to sort of jump into something that seems new? Like the idea of jumping into renewables to many might seem as if like a bit of a risk after a pandemic like this. So do you think people will see that as a risk, or do you think they'll say, okay, we need to do something different this time?
Well, Joe, that is a great question, but let me tell you that the growth in jobs in wind and solar far outpaces the growth in jobs in fossil energy today. So we need to continue the trend that we're already in. We're already on the positive glide slope with respect to bringing more renewables into the market. But we need to keep pushing in that. Otherwise, they'll continue to stay small. We need to increase the percent of our electricity we get from renewables, and then we need to improve our grid and re-engineer our transportation system in this country.
I hope that continues even with the extremely low gas prices, oil prices, right? I just hope that doesn't convince us.
Right. Obviously, there's going to be pushback in everything. And, the other important part is in the global way, and we talk about our national security, what's enabled the United States in part to be a global leader has been our prowess in science and technology. That has been a fundamental foundation of our global leadership since World War II. From engines to the internet, to GPS, to satellites, to the space, in every domain we've led. And in the last decade, our investment in America's science and technology has begun to decline relative to China, to parts of Europe and other industrialized nations. We need to continue that leadership. And much of that's done in our universities, it's done in our labs, and we need to continue that. And then we need to focus on the transition to market. That's where we often run into a gap. We call it the valley of death. You get good technology, good science ideas coming out of universities and labs, but they need to make the transition into actual use, where it's practical for Americans and for others, and for us then to be a leading exporter of clean energy technologies. That will help America's competitive advantage economically around the world.
Do you think there's currently the leadership for that in politics to pivot from like an oil-based economy to a clean energy economy, especially when there's some people in the government who do deny climate change?
Yes, but those numbers are falling, and people on both sides of the aisle now increasingly realize that climate is real, that clean energy provides opportunities for innovation and for jobs, and they want to help their citizens, their districts, their constituents make that transition. People frame it in different ways in different places, geographically, but many times they're all beginning to work towards the same goal. I'm hopeful that one of the future stimulus packages will take up this concept that we've put forward of a citizens' energy and environmental core, and will focus on the resilient infrastructure that we need to rebuild our economy for a low-carbon future.
So obviously right now, I think probably the pandemic is at the top of everyone's, agenda or schedule. That's my dog. But before this, let's say, what did you see climate change sort of slowly getting up in the ranks of what's important to talk about, in DC or, in the Beltway? Has it come to the point where it's sort of like a number one priority, or at least in the top three?
I'd say it's certainly been, I've seen it in polls, be in the top 5, certainly in the top 10. And I think that it's increasingly a key element. Certainly in the Democratic campaigns, it's a key element. Has been among all the candidates, and certainly among Joe Biden, who's leading on that score. He's getting a lot of good support also from Bernie and his voters and supporters and others. And I think, but I increasingly see many Republicans. There's a bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus in the House. There's a bipartisan Senate Climate Caucus now. So increasingly you see Congress and other leaders, and certainly the leadership in the U.S. in the last few years in this area has been at the state and local level and in the private sector. I expect that to continue at least, for the rest of this year, but we'll see what happens in November.